Oh,
you know,
yeah.
our little ones. But this is
Yeah.
not children, you know, but that's sort of on topic of what we're going to be touching on today is little ones, you know, family members, little children to say.
Where's little Johnny gonna go to school this year?
Little Johnny, little Timmy.
You need a
Yeah,
little Jennifer too, or something, right?
mhm. Little Sally,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's a tough subject, This is one of the high seasons for family lawyers when it comes back to school. It's not as bad this year because we've kind of swung out of the pandemic, but it seemed like the rules were changing every day for a while there.
Yeah.
You know, and I find that parenting and finances are, you know, they're some of the biggest pain points in
Yeah.
relationships. And, you know, that sort of translates into separations as well. So definitely a big topic that we're talking about today, a very applicable topic given, you know, we're creeping up on the September long weekend. Back to school is right around the corner. So I think you know, our back to school or back to after hours came at a really perfect time.
Yeah. And in Ontario, usually next week, right? Tuesday's the big day
Tuesday.
for a lot of the kids. I know in parts of the US, they go back in August. A lot of university students go back in August, but grade school, high school, next week's the big week.
That it is. Yeah, there's so many, like Steph said, sticking points. Public versus private. If you want to relocate and go to a whole new jurisdiction, there's so many things that come up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about you all, but I do see 5 o'clock. So it is after hours. So I just want to take a minute to thank everybody for joining us. I know we were on our own sort of summer break, but we are back. And we will be talking today about co-parenting, specifically tips for back to school. So before we jump in, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. You may notice that there is not a chat feature, but for all our Zoom attendees, there is a Q&A button. So please feel free to submit any comments, any questions that you have through that feature. The purpose of this series is to discuss general topics around separation, divorce, and other family law matters. So any information provided in this series should not be taken as legal advice. If you do have questions regarding your specific matter, please call our office, call a lawyer in your area to book a consultation to receive tailored guidance. And lastly, before I jump into some introductions, make sure you stay until the end. We will be sharing how you can schedule a free 20-minute meeting with one of our lawyers. So stay tuned.
We have operators on standby.
We do.
Right.
We
The
have
phones are open. Yeah.
always open. So for all of you tuning in, you may see 4 people that you know on your screen or 4 that you don't. So just for some little intros, we do have Russell Alexander here. He is the founder and senior partner at Russell Alexander Collaborative Family Lawyers. With over 25 years of experience, he uses his knowledge and expertise to serve his clients in all aspects of family law. Russell has written 4 books, and he is a fully trained collaborative practice lawyer. And you can also see him speaking at various conferences on collaborative practice, marketing, technology, and the law. We also have Joseph here. He is a compassionate family lawyer driven by a deep desire to support families through challenging times. With a background in commerce, he brings a strong negotiation skill set, analytical skill set, and critical thinking skills to his legal practice. His passion for family law was further honed through legal writing, research, hands-on experience, all through the family and children law placement at Queen's University. And during his articling period, he gained confidence in handling a wide range of family law matters. Joseph emphasizes active listening, clear communication, and empathy, fostering a comfortable environment for clients to discuss personal matters. We also have Shanza. Shanza is a dedicated family lawyer with a strong focus on compassionate and effective legal representation. Her background in business management enhances her strategic approach to legal matters. She excels in negotiations, achieving favorable settlements through strategic dialogue and strong advocacy for her clients. And she prioritizes clear communication, ensuring that clients are informed and empowered through the legal process. And for those of you who do not know me, I'm Stephanie. I've been immersed in family law for, over 6 years now. My dedication to family law stems from my passion for assisting clients through what's traditionally a difficult time by approaching matters with empathy, integrity, and compassion. And over the course of my legal career, I've gained experience managing a diverse caseload with sensitive matters, negotiating practical solutions tailored to my clients' goals and interests, and advocating for my clients both inside and outside the courtroom. So before we jump in, Russ, do you have any, common themes or issues that you see come up in family law matters, especially, around this time with back to school?
Yeah, traditionally, Steph, thank you for those kind words and introduction. Traditionally, this is a super busy time of the year for family lawyers. We see a bump at Christmas time, summertime, back to school. There's a seasonality to family disputes. So if I had to characterize it, Steph, there's a big three group that we always see all the time. First group I'm going to call first timers. So they got really young children going into grade school, junior, senior kindergarten, maybe Montessori. They've separated. They live in two different jurisdictions. When the child was younger, they're co-parenting or equal amounts of parenting time. And now it's time for little Johnny to go to school. Huge decision. So that's going to set up what we call status quo. And it will be very difficult to change that later, especially if little Johnny's doing successful in that school setting. So and the plumbing doesn't matter, whether it's mom or dad, as soon as we get the status quo rolling, courts are really reluctant to upset the apple cart unless there's a good reason to. So you gotta be really careful when you're entering school, what jurisdiction, who's going to be making those decisions, how you're going to co-parent during those times. So that's a big one. Lots of times we start working on that in the spring, well before you need to register. Many parents get busy, right? Life goes on. They go for summer holidays. They have extended family over during the summer, and then they realize it's time to get little Johnny registered, and everybody runs off to the lawyer's office. The second group I would characterize, Steph, is what we call overholding access. So this is another little Johnny, but maybe this little Johnny went to visit his daddy during the summer and had a wonderful summer, camping and boating and all the other things, and decides he doesn't want to go back to mom's house. And dad's saying, he wants to live with me now. I'm going to keep him, and I'm going to put him into school and to my neighborhood. Very difficult situation, especially if we have an established status quo. Oftentimes, there's no separation agreement or court order in place. You may have to move quickly to, if there is self-help and one parent takes unilateral action, to change that. So that's quite common. And then the third group we see quite often, Steph, is 14, 15, sometimes 16-year-olds. They've got their own friends, their own idea of what they want to be doing. They may just decide they're going to go live with the other parent or not go to school or go to a different school. And those can be quite difficult too, because we have very immature 15-year-olds and very mature 10-year-olds, and they're all over the map. So we want to gauge whether the child's being coached. So those are the flavors I'm seeing, but let's see what our panel thinks. Shanza or Joseph, what are you seeing in terms of back to school experience as lawyers, but also during your articling? Shanza, you want to go first?
Yeah, Shanza, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I'll say. So I've noticed, just as Russ, you kind of mentioned that between these three stages, the decisions and the communication and the conversations that the co-parents are having, they differ so much. If you have a kid who's just starting school, you are going to be co-parenting a child who is going to school for the first time. So the conversations you're gonna have are gonna be focused on, for example, what school they're gonna go to. And as firsts go, they're not always smooth, right? So you want to be able to have open communication where expectations are clear. You want to be able to talk about preparation for what the child will need when going to school, setting up routines, because now they're going from being home all the time to starting school. So how are you going to transition them to a completely different routine where they were at home versus now they have school every day? So the conversations differ so much depending on what stage the kids are at. And then if they're in school, again, now you're more focused on staying up to date. Now they're getting older. They're going to be taking part in extracurriculars. So those are new conversations coming in right there. And the third group that Russ mentioned, when the kids are even older, now they're going to have a say. They're gonna be like, I don't want to go to mom. I don't want to go to dad. So how much do you push them, right? And how much self-help comes in, how much obligation a parent has to kind of support the other parent's parenting time. So all the conversations differ so much depending on where you're at. But yeah, that's like a little my kind of teeter on all the conversations you want to have if you have kids going back to school for different age groups. And yeah, Joseph, I'll also let you kind of take the lead now on this.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think a lot of great points were raised by both you and Russ. I think a lot of people also forget is that you're going from a unified household, unified family income. Now parties are separated. That often means that the finances are not necessarily going to be there. Um, Incomes are going to be separated. Sometimes parties are going to be living separate, which means, those incomes that they're earning are going to be attributed to their own households. So oftentimes we have children who may have been enrolled, for example, in private school when the financial stability was there from both parents. Now we see that there's two households, two separate incomes. Maybe the funds are not going to necessarily be there for little Johnny, little Timmy, little Sally to be enrolled back in private school. And decisions are have to be made whether the child's going to be going to a public school in that jurisdiction. So that's just one of the conversations that often arises. But as Russ and Shanza both mentioned, different age groups, regardless of even the age groups, there's always going to be that one theme coming back, and that's going to be communication and how it is effectively done.
Absolutely. And Joseph, you touched on something interesting too, which has come up in a lot of cases that we've the firm has dealt with over the years is jurisdiction. Russ sort of touched on it. If it's the child's first time going to school, mom lives in Oshawa, but dad now lives in Peterborough. Even though in the summer a shared parenting time was going to work effectively, now we have to look at the commute to school. What's going to be realistic? If it's a 16-year-old, that's going to look a lot different than a 4-year-old. And where is the line? Is a 15-minute commute the average? Is it 30-minute commute? So all of those things, I've seen come up in cases, and different judges will rule differently. I've seen judges rule 25 minutes for a young child is sort of the sweet spot. I've seen them say, no, 40 minutes is okay. It's a private school. It's a Montessori. 40 minutes is acceptable. They can nap. They can have food on the way. So that's definitely a topic and a sticking point that can come up, when we talk about this back to school sort of process and planning. So you also, everyone, all of us here sort of talked about communication and how that can be instrumental to parents being able to work together to make the transition as smooth as possible. Joe, do you have any strategies or tips for maintaining open and constructive communication for co-parents?
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to co-parenting, really the most important thing to keep in mind is that your conversations, the parent and parent conversations, should always be centered about what's best for your child. That should be the foremost thought process when having these conversations. Obviously, it can be easy to let personal feelings or past conflicts creep into those discussions, but it really is crucial to stay focused on the child's needs. Using clear and concise language is also really key. And as we know, misunderstandings often happen because something from one parent wasn't communicated clearly. So the ability for parents to try to be as specific as possible about what you mean and what you are trying to communicate is crucial. Active listening also plays a big role here too. Making sure that one parent or even both parents are not just hearing, but really understanding what the other parent is saying is important. Summarizing their points back to them to confirm that you're on the same page is often a tool that I tell people to use to make sure that miscommunication is prevented. And regular check-ins are also a really good habit to get into. These regular check-ins, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, having consistent times that parents are touching base about, their child's progress and any changes that may have arose in the last week or 2 weeks can really help keep things, running smoothly. Obviously, family law wouldn't go without saying that emotions can run high. So sometimes it's important to steer clear of triggers, as hard as that may be. Being able to stick to the current topic and avoiding bringing up past grievances that could derail the conversation, and sticking with the best interest of the child's needs, what's on track, what's on topic is really important. And how do we do this? Well, using neutral platforms, various co-parenting apps such as Our Family Wizard is one that's very spoken about, highly recommended by judges and lawyers. Neutral platforms like this can be really effective. It doesn't just allow parents to stay organized, but it could also keep a record of communications, which can also be useful if disagreements ever arise. And speaking of disagreements, it's always a good idea to document important conversations and decisions. Document, document, document. This way, if there's ever a dispute, if there's a he said, she said, there's a written record to refer back to. And ultimately, if communication breaks down entirely, don't hesitate to seek professional help. Either that can be professional mediation, speaking to a lawyer, or even just someone in a support system that you can confide in. Obviously, they wouldn't be giving you legal advice, but having that support system is really important, and they can direct you to the necessary professionals. Sometimes having a neutral third party can make all the difference in really coming to a resolution.
Absolutely. And those parenting apps, they're super, super helpful. I think App Close is another one. I think that's a free one that a lot of my clients have found very useful. It's also having that independent platform, you subconsciously edit yourself more than if you were just, going back and forth on text or Facebook Messenger. You know that it's being recorded, it can't be altered. So if you're sending passive aggressive emails or texts through this app, there's no really getting around that. And I believe, did Our Family Wizard used to flag like passive aggressive language? So it sort of keeps you in check to make sure that you're not acting out of emotion, you're not speaking in a way that is only going to add fuel to the fire, which it's very easy to do when your emotions are high. So just maintaining that sort of 3-second rule of breathe for 3 seconds. Do I really want to send this? Do I really want to say that? That's definitely helpful.
And sometimes it's by design, right? The other parent knows how to push the button.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to send that message after mom or dad's had a glass of wine or a beer, and they're going to get a reaction. And then that's the first thing that's going to show up in court, right? They could set a trap for you if you're not careful.
So if you, find yourself in those sort of circumstances, just remember what Joseph said, all those communication strategies to utilize to make sure that you can only control your actions. So just make sure you're, taking accountability and doing what's best for your kids. And schedules and life can get busy, and, it can be hard to sort of manage that, stay on top of communication with, the individual that you're co-parenting with. So are there any, Shans, I'm going to flip it over to you, any strategies for managing that, hectic, busy life, back to school activities, parent-teacher meetings? How can clients navigate that?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to piggyback on some of the things that Joe said, because communication, again, really comes into play when you're trying to coordinate schedules and staying up to date with what's going on with the children's lives. And as co-parents, you both want to be involved and you both want to stay up to date and on top of things. Keep track of activities, when and where it's happening, who's taking them, any school events, parent-teacher meetings, performances. So to stay up to date, you want to keep a record of these things so you don't miss anything. And as co-parents, this can be an even heftier task because you want to avoid any conflicts in the event that there is a miscommunication. And when people are separating, there are chances that miscommunication will lead to increased conflict. So you want to stay up to date to kind of avoid going down that path. Especially in particularly like tense co-parenting relationships, the smallest issue can easily get blown out of proportion and can create huge conflicts. Missed appointments and misunderstandings are especially conflict prone, which is why I would say even having a shared calendar is important. So some people will do a shared calendar where they will set up important dates and keep track of any activities. And this is all happening in one place in that one calendar. It helps both to stay informed, and it also cut down on the chances of any double booking or missing events. And you have a clear track of what's there, what's not there. So it's hard for the other parent to kind of come at you and be like, you never told me. Well, it's in the shared calendar. People also use like stuff. You talk about the apps, right? So apps are another thing. If you don't want to go with the shared calendar, there are some other ways to keep track. So you can maybe go with regular check-ins. You can have weekly or bi-weekly check-ins where you're kind of discussing the schedules and upcoming appointments or dates. This is more applicable when co-parents are on good terms and they're able to communicate with each other and kind of, work around each other's schedule and see what's coming up, what's not coming up. I would also say email updates is also an option. So send updates with important dates and changes. This also helps keep a record of what was communicated and agreed upon. And co-parenting apps, they're built for this purpose. They're designed so that parents can communicate using these apps and kind of filters all the unnecessary aggression and conflict.
Yeah. And it gets even more complicated and hard to navigate, so many moving parts. If you have multiple kids at different ages enrolled in different extracurriculars, like Joseph mentioned, you used to be this unit, this one household. So now you have two independent homes. You might be going to three different, gymnastics and then hockey and then horseback riding. So being able to co-parent effectively, it's only going to help your kids succeed. Obviously, it can be very challenging and difficult, but as much as possible, we want to help you navigate this new life and this new routine so that your kids can continue to live life, go to all the things that they want to do, and have two parents that really love and care about them. And all of these decisions, Russ touched on it about decisions with where to enroll a child for school, what extracurriculars can be afforded now that you have two, financially separate households. These decisions are huge when we talk about separation agreements, when we talk about court orders, when we look at the parenting component of a separation, decision-making responsibility is one of those key elements. So in order to try to mitigate any arguments or fights down the line, it's always very useful to try to implement decision-making protocols from the outset. Clear guidelines for who's going to make the decision. If you're jointly going to make a decision, what's a reasonable response time? So there's different types of decision-making setups. You have sole decision-making responsibility, which means one parent sort of has the final say in any major decision when it comes to a child. This may be because that's always been the status quo. It may be because one parent was, unable to be there to make those types of decisions, or for other, health or safety reasons. So that's sort of one element where one parent is sort of having the final say. But often we always recommend, if it's safe to do so, if it's reasonable to do so, that they consult with the other parent. So if the parents have more amicable communication, they're able to communicate more effectively, that's where we typically see joint decision-making responsibility. So both parents jointly together as a unity will decide. No parent's going to make a unilateral action or engage in self-help to sort of, take that decision or that say from the other parent. But often, if communication is a little bit sensitive, it's good to have rules or protocols in place. If one parent brings up an issue that they need the other parent's say on, could you please provide your position, your thoughts, your decision, in a reasonable time frame, whether that's 48 hours or if it's, for an extracurricular in the summer, maybe you talk about that the month before. Things like that are really, really helpful to implement, whether it's through a parenting agreement or just amongst yourselves. If joint decision making, it's not really working, but both parents want and are capable of having that decision making role. Another option is parallel parenting. So the big components or the big topics of decision making that we see come up are decisions around education, decisions around health, extracurricular activities. So if you aren't necessarily on the same page, more often than not, parallel parenting might be more effective for you, meaning parent A gets maybe final say on education where parent B gets final say on health, something in and along those lines. So those are all things to consider. Every family is going to be different. Every dynamic is going to be different. So it's about what's in the best interest of your child and what's going to work best for your family. So that's sort of a little blurb on decision making. Does anyone else have any thoughts or any tips when it comes to setting those protocols in place?
They're so effective. I know we have circulated the rules for separated parents, which is basic common sense rules. Oftentimes, when it's time to go back to school, it's useful to be reminded of those rules and not use your kids as messengers or as weapons. It's a very busy time for a lot of families. And I had one client, they would actually post the rules on the fridge of each parent's home. And the kid would come up and say, Dad, you're breaking rule number 6 right now, and call the parents. It's really, the child was the responsible one in the family, but it's effective to, if you're following any of these strategies you hear tonight, whether communication strategies, scheduling, decision-making protocols, reduce it to writing, maybe even bullet form, say, here's what we've agreed to. And that's going to be effective to hold each spouse responsible, hold each parent responsible. It's also may be helpful if you go back to court, you can say, well, here's the status quo. This is what we agreed to, and this is where things went wrong and why.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything in writing is always best.
Yeah.
And we touched a bit about how those financial responsibilities can sort of impact, back to school, impact extracurriculars. Joe, do you mind touching on, how parents can manage school-related expenses? What about supplies, uniforms, field trips? Those are all sort of little things that maybe parents don't consider at the outset, but when they come up, it's like, oh gosh, what do we do?
Yeah,
they add up.
They do.
Yeah,
I remember
especially if you got like a star like Joseph playing rep hockey, you're probably looking at thousands of dollars, right, Joseph?
Yeah, no, definitely. That was definitely tough on the parents, but it's definitely a lot of money. But I remember as soon as August rolled around and they used to hand out these sheets for each grade, what items that you needed for back to school. And I was so looking forward, always going to Staples with my mom and my brother, and we would go and check things off the list that we got. And it's expensive,
Get
right?
your protractor, and do they even still use protractors anymore? Remember you
I
get
used to use the
those
protractor. I don't know if they still use it, but I used to have that, got the
a
stencil
crazy
books,
ass sharp thing that you had, and
yeah, no, everything. It was just always it was the best time of the year, always going to Staples. But You know, when it comes to handling school-related expenses, it's really important to understand that both parents are typically required to share these costs. And this includes, as you mentioned, things like school supplies, uniforms, even field trips. And these types of expenses comprise what's called Section 7 or extraordinary expenses. And these expenses are in addition to the table child support amounts that likely one parent is paying to the other parent. The parent paying is the payor, and the one receiving is either the recipient or the payee. And that's, like I said, in addition to these Section 7 expenses. Um, so in most cases, parents pay their share of expenses, the Section 7 expenses, per their proportional share of income. So this means that if both parents, for example, earn, let's just say, $65,000 a year, then these expenses would be split 50-50. However, if one parent makes, for example, $75,000 a year and the other parent earns $50,000 per year, then likely a fair arrangement between the parents would be for the parent who's earning $75,000 a year to pay approximately 60% of the costs, while the other parent would pay 40%. And that's to avoid any surprises. It's clear cut, and being able to sit down at the beginning of the school year and creating a budget plan, outlining all potential expenses. That way, both parents can have a clear understanding of what's expected and how costs will be split. So the proportional weight rate of paying for expenses is always a good tool. If you believe that both parents should be paying 50-50, if incomes are pretty much in line with one another and both have that residual net income or that disposable net income left over, that they feel that they should be splitting those expenses evenly, that's all right as well. It's just a matter of what agreement that the parents come to, but moral of the story is that this should be done well in advance of the school season starting. Going back to communication again, early communication is really crucial here. And I know, as I mentioned, by discussing upcoming expenses in advance, both parents can prevent any last minute stress or any disagreements. And as sort of an example, parents might also want to consider using either a joint account if they have one already, if they're still separated, but they haven't gone through the process yet. If they have a joint account, they can use that, or even an expense tracking app to manage and keep track of these payments. This not only ensures, the transparency, but also makes it easier to handle finances fairly. Also, one parent can pay the expenses in full, and the other parent can reimburse them their share of the expenses. Moral of the story is that there's a lot of way in which parents can share these expenses for their children. It's also really important to clarify what qualifies as extraordinary expenses in family law, especially even in Toronto. And these are typically costs that go beyond regular child support, which I mentioned earlier, like certain school-related fees, and both parents, like I said, are usually responsible for them. And if disagreements over expenses do come up, having a plan for dispute resolution in place is essential. Whether through mediation or going to your lawyers and negotiating from that standpoint, it's really good to know how you'll handle conflicts even before they arise.
And you'd be surprised what counts as an acceptable expense. I had a case management judge. He told me cell phones are a reasonable expense, and he's ordering that the child have a cell phone.
Yeah, and I think you used a very critical word there, reasonable, right? There is a test of reasonableness that needs to be applied. If, prior to separation, your kids were, getting, they weren't enrolled in these high expensive sports. They weren't getting, new materials, new clothes every year. It was sort of, every other year. To then try to bind, post separation, to bind the other parent to, well, no, Sally said she wants to do horseback riding now.
Yeah,
She wants to have
$10,000 equestrian horse camp, right?
Yeah, she only wants to wear Dior. She only wants to have an iPhone. It needs to be within a realistic and a reasonable frame, because you are sharing those expenses. And if you are the higher income earner, to bind maybe the other parent to those expensive luxury items, that's not reasonable. It's not fair.
Yeah, even
So
when it comes to hockey stuff, the cost difference between rep hockey, a AAA program and house league could be several $1,000s. And if the child was playing AAA prior to separation, that might continue, but the judge may say, no, it's unreasonable after separation if he didn't have any interest in that.
absolutely. So all things to consider, all things to bear in mind, all things to, if you are having trouble navigating, speak to a lawyer. They can definitely help guide you and help you understand what may be reasonable, what's not, and other things that you might not have considered. And speaking of those legal considerations, what are some of the rights, obligations of co-parents, especially here in Ontario, about schooling? Joe, I'm gonna flip it back to you.
Yeah, no problem. So, parents, understanding your legal rights and obligations as co-parents, I know I say it, but it is essential. And this is especially when it comes to your child's education. One of the first things to consider is how decision-making responsibility has been addressed, either by agreement, court order, or through the status quo. Steph sort of spoke about that briefly. And in Ontario, as Steph did mention, there is a distinction between joint and sole decision-making responsibility, and this determines who has the final say on schooling matters. Not only schooling matters, but for the purposes of today's discussion, we're just going to be focusing on the educational aspect. Regardless of the decision-making responsibility arrangement, both parents typically have the right to access school records, attend parent-teacher meetings, and be involved in major decisions about their child's education. And it really is important to make sure that these rights are respected and to communicate with the school if any issues do arise. Including schooling-related provisions in your parenting plan, if you're in search of creating one, or even if you're going to incorporate them in a separation agreement that doesn't have a specific parenting plan sort of attached to it as its own schedule, but either a fixed parenting plan or a separation agreement is definitely something to consider. In that, you can outline who is responsible for school drop-offs, who will attend school events, how you'll handle communication with the school, and really having all these details ironed out in advance, either through a parenting plan or through a separation agreement, can prevent confusion and conflict later down the road. If disputes over schooling do come up, it's really important to understand the various legal avenues that are available to resolve them. This may have to involve family court intervention. It could involve mediation if parties choose to go that route. Obviously, it is depending on the situation. And finally, if one parent is considering relocating, I know Steph spoke about that previously, it's really important to understand the legal implications, especially if the move will affect the child's schooling. Relocation can complicate parenting arrangements, so it really is important to handle it carefully and obviously within the legal framework.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, lots to consider. There's so many elements, not only to separation, but even just specifically around parenting and schooling. So it's definitely important to understand your rights, your obligations, and to seek help, to seek legal advice, guidance to help you navigate that as you move forward. As much as we would love to be fortune tellers and to have a crystal ball and be able to predict what's going to happen and to plan for everything under the sun, sometimes emergencies happen. Things come up that you can't anticipate, things that never in your wildest dreams did you expect. Russ, I'm gonna send this your way. How can parents handle those unexpected situations? Whether it's school closure, I know where's wood? We touched wood that we're past the pandemic, but that's something no one would have expected. How can parents, pivot in order to accommodate those types of unknowns?
Yeah, I think my advice would be to normalize it. And a lot of tonight's advice is planning and putting a process in place. And that's no different than emergencies. They're going to happen. They happen to all families, usually when least expected. Some people say they'll happen in threes. We've had some crazy weather with floods and storms. We've get some serious winter storms in southern Ontario, ice storms during the winter months. It's going to happen. So plan for it. 4 points in no particular order. Certainly create an emergency plan with protocols and share it, not just with your spouse, with the school, with extended family, with new partners. So everybody has an idea in terms of what the protocols are you're going to create. Our law firm has a phone tree, and everybody's contact information is in there, together with their significant other or family member if they don't have a spouse. So if there is an emergency, we have a protocol in place in terms of who's to contact who in what order. So our clients still are able to be serviced. We had to implement it a few times. We had a flood in one of our offices that shut down half of our network for a day. And we needed to communicate with the court, with our clients, with each other to set up a plan moving forward to deal with that information. Fortunately, no client data was lost, but we did experience some downtime. And that was something as simple as a water heater bursting over a server. That probably happened 5-10 years ago. I'm not sure if you're part of our firm at that time. And today, a water heater in this office was leaking, and we had to call an emergency plumber. Again, there's a different location. I don't know why there's water heaters above all our computer servers and wherever office we have, but it's certainly a design flaw. They're up in the ceiling. I didn't even know it was there. So we implement the phone tree. We have a plan to communicate to the team. And just by way of analogy, that's no different than your family and your children. And so you want to establish those protocols. Certainly you want to prepare emergency kits if necessary. You know, the Costco and Canadian Tire have these driving kits that are available for winter months. If necessary, have an EpiPen if the child or a family member is susceptible to that. Medications, everything that you'd need in an emergency kit, include that. Maybe have one in each car or traveling with the child or the caregiver at the time. And communicate with the school. If there is an emergency or if there's special needs or allergies or medical conditions, have that be part of the school's record. So teachers know what the protocols are, who the family doctor is, whether the child needs to go to an emergency room or whether a visit to the family doctor would suffice. And over communicate would be my advice. But it's going to happen. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. But if you have a plan in place and you include extended family members and new spouses, everybody's going to be much more prepared, will be acting much more rationally, and help normalize it. I think people will perform much better if you have those plans in place. Some people can go so far to practice it. I'm not sure, depending on, the child's needs and what the emergency is. There's certain things you just cannot predict, but it's something to consider as well. So one thing I did with my kids growing up, I taught them how to use a fire extinguisher in the backyard. We started a fire and I said, okay, this is where the fire extinguisher is located in the house. This is how you put a fire out. And we practiced it a couple of times, but unless somebody teaches you, you might not understand. And it's no different than EpiPens or medications. Teach the spouses what the requirements are, what the dosage is, how to apply whatever the treatment is that your child may need.
Absolutely. And it really can tie back into, we talked about communication, schedule sharing. Maybe there's a, emergency note or emergency, this is the medication that your child's on. Anytime they go to the doctor, they have a change, just make sure it's updated. It's something that both parents can have access to. Extended family members, if they're watching your children, they'll have access to. You can share it with people who are going to be caring for your child. And it's a great resource and tool to have so that everybody is always on the same page. Everybody has the information that may be needed. And I think something that it may feel difficult to do, but it can really, really be a savior in those types of emergency situations, is to remain flexible and compassionate. Your focus is got to be on your kids, no matter what disagreements you might have with the other parent, no matter what history you have, animosity. Always try to be the best version of you, the best parent that you can be. And that's really going to, shine through and help sort of get you out of those emergency or dark situations.
And show some patience and some grace and some empathy. Your children are going to learn from your conduct, and they're going to mirror how you conduct yourself. So it's a chance for you to show some leadership and be a role model for your children.
Absolutely. And I've gone before judges where on paper, there's so many disagreements. It looks like the parents are maybe at war because of the different perceptions on whether it's the relationship or what happened or finances or parenting or whatever the disagreements or the disconnect is. But both parents were able to set all that aside, come to a consent and agreement, and the judge commended them. He showed up and said, I thought we were going to be sort of at a screaming match, a fight, but the two parents came together. They worked out, what was in the best interest of their kids. And that's really what the court is going to be focused on is the best interest of the children. So that's sort of in a court setting, but in negotiations or if conflicts arrive after you're out of court, after you have an agreement, there's different conflict resolution tools that can be utilized. And Shanza, do you mind sharing any techniques that you have for parents that face those types of disagreements, whether it's at the start or in the future?
Yeah. So when you're co-parenting, I think it's safe to assume there will be instances where there will be disagreements. And, first thing that you always want to start with is communication. I know we keep saying communication, open communication, but what exactly is open communication, right? So when you're both communicating, make sure that you're both able to express your concerns and viewpoints. Sometimes people don't feel heard. They don't feel like what they're saying holds any importance to the other party. So just make sure you're both listening. You're both able to, communicate exactly what your concerns are. Remember, you're a team and you're trying to parent a child who needs both their parents. And so active listening is the key. If you want to communicate your viewpoint, you also want to make sure you listen to them. And that's how they will listen to you too. So it's a two-way street. You both kind of have to come to the table with a mindset where you're in a position to communicate, listen, and come to a solution. And while you're having these conversations, make sure your focus is on the kids and what's best for them. Always discuss how the different decisions will impact their schooling, their activities, and their overall well-being. And you always want to prioritize their needs and their interests in this whole decision-making process. Another thing I would say is when you're communicating, set clear goals. When you come to the table to talk to your partner, ex-partner, agree on what you want to achieve with the resolution, because it's very easy to lose track and go down memory lane and who did what and when. Remember to stay focused on what you're trying to resolve. It could be anything. It could be trying to find consistency in routines between the two households. It could be trying to agree on what the shared responsibilities are, or agreements on, as Joe talked about, finances and school-related expenses. So it can be a number of different topics. So make sure you have clear goals and you know exactly what's the topic of discussion and what exactly it is that you're trying to get an agreement on. And again, if communication is not yielding the results that you want, then consider involving a third party. Again, Joe talked about this through mediators can come in and kind of help the parties. Even a family professional, they're great with helping parties come to a parenting plan. If you have a plan and there is some disagreements on what the plan states or what exactly it is that was communicated during the discussions or what exactly the agreement meant to communicate, you know, the professionals, even lawyers, we can all kind of come in and kind of facilitate those discussions and help find a mutual solution. And if you don't have a plan yet, have a proper co-parenting plan. That's something that can really avoid conflicts in the future. If you have something written down, you have a procedure, you have responsibilities outlined, exactly who's doing what, then those can really minimize the conflict and discussions to things that are, for example, emergencies or things, you know, only some things that were not addressed, and then you can kind of go move forward on topics that were not initially addressed, but you still have a parenting plan that addresses the very major decisions and how you're going to handle those going forward. Steph talked about this: be flexible, be compromising. It's your kids. I know you both want to kind of have your say, and you both have your understanding of what's best for the child, but be able to compromise in finding a middle ground and listen to your child and their needs and what they want. Avoid blame and criticism, and seek support. Seek a counselor or therapist if you think that's what your family needs, to kind of come to an agreement, and you're all even if it's different households, it's one family unit, it's a child with two parents, and they want that in their life. So kind of just focus on that and try to come to solutions moving forward.
Yeah, it's definitely useful to have those types of protocols in place before the conflict arises, so you have an idea of how to navigate it. But even if you don't, you know, using those tools that Shanza mentioned, speaking to a lawyer, speaking to a third party, like Joseph mentioned, some support system, you know, maybe you feel like you have to vent, maybe vent to your best friend, vent to your mom, so that you can sort of come back and have discussions with, you know, the other individual you're co-parenting with in a more relaxed, you've kind of gotten that out of your system, and you can focus on the task at hand. And, you know, ultimately, all of this, everything that we're saying today, all of these tips, these tools about communication, effective co-parenting, it really, the purpose is to really support your children, to support their emotional well-being, to ensure that they feel supported, not only, you know, during the school year, but through the separation process. It's, you know, it can be really difficult on parents to go through a separation, to navigate all these unknowns. And especially it trickles down to the kids. So ensuring that, like Russ mentioned, you follow those rules for separated parents. I believe we can send those out in the show notes. So if you don't have them, we'll provide that as a resource to you. But it really does boil down to treat others how you would like to be treated. Don't talk about the other parent in a negative light to your child. Avoid using them as a middleman or somebody to sort of transfer information through, and put them first. Another thing that a lot of families are doing, whether it's covered by insurance or it's not, is if your children are maybe not sure who to talk to, or they, you know, they don't want to complain about one parent to the other, seeking out guidance counselors or therapists or some independent neutral third party for your kids to speak with. A lot of schools nowadays have those types of resources, whether it's a teacher, whether it's you know, a social worker at the school. Those are definitely things that I always encourage my clients to look into and to see if that is available to them, or something that, you know, both parents can agree to enroll or register their children in. Not only does it provide some weight off of the child, you know, they have somebody that they can go to speak to, but it's also good if there's any concerns that the child's not maybe comfortable speaking to you about, you still get to understand where they're coming from, how they're feeling, and to make sure that they feel supported. So we sort of talked a lot about communication, a lot about different parenting styles. Everyone's, you know, going to be raised differently, have different perceptions on what the right way to parent is, what the right way to, you know, discipline or, you know, how many extracurriculars to enroll your kid in. So something that, you know, both married and separated and, you know, together parents face is balancing these different parenting styles. How do you find common ground? How do you, you know, respect somebody else's parenting style that you don't agree with? Like, how do you navigate that? Russ, you've had, you know, gosh, how many cases walk through your desk, walk through your door? Do you have any tips for parents who have polar opposite parenting styles, how they can sort of come together for their kids?
Well, I guess it's time for story time. We haven't had a story, right?
Yeah, we love a story.
So where do you want to be 20 years from now? Do you want to be the parents where one parent's disinvited to your daughter's wedding because it's just going to be a scene and it's going to be an incident? It's going to be all about the separated parents from 20 years previous and not about this young girl's wedding? Or do you want to walk your daughter down the aisle and have both parents be at the wedding? Doesn't mean they have to like each other or sit next to each other. That's the course you're setting by making these decisions today. As simple as back to school sounds. The more you can agree, the more you can cooperate, the better, more productive your child's going to be. Studies show kids who have a good relationship with both parents turn out to be much more productive members of society, much more rounded, or usually go to post-secondary education. Kids who do not fall victim to drug addiction end up in the youth criminal justice system and oftentimes may end up in jail. So those are the decisions you're making when you talk about these young children and back to school. Sounds dramatic, but it's true. Carrie Heinzel, a family professional we work with, financial professional we work with all the time, but she's always got great insight into parenting styles. She sees the best and the worst. And it's not like a car, right? These kids don't come with an owner's manual. And there's not one right way to parent these young children. So you want to acknowledge and respect each other's parenting styles, especially if you certainly want to ensure that the child's best interests are looked after and not put in harm or risk at any fashion. But maybe just because the style is different than what you're used to or what you grew up with doesn't mean it's not necessarily healthy for the child to have exposure to different parenting styles when they're in different homes. Agree, this is a big one. Agree on how you're going to discipline this child. You take one thing away from tonight's program, don't let your new partner do the discipline, especially if it's any kind of physical discipline. It's just going to blow up. Likely the child will not return. The other parent will be incredibly upset. And that's a rift that's really hard to repair. So have an agreement in terms of what the discipline is going to look like, who's going to be disciplining the child, what circumstances will discipline be applied. Certainly discipline is necessary and an important part of a child's development, but certainly get an agreement regarding parenting styles regarding discipline. The discipline's inappropriate or not in the child's best interest, Children's Aid Society may be called, the family doctor may report it, the school may report it, the children may be apprehended from your care for a short period of time, or if it's a significant case, and removed from your care permanently. And if you need help, talk to your family doctor, talk to a social worker, talk to a family professional, and get the best advice in terms of discipline approaches that are appropriate and effective. Be flexible. Obviously, you're going to need to adapt, and we see this quite often. There's a question that we had that we talked about. Different people are differently involved in child's school and participating in homework and things of this nature. And I remember I had a client who was upset because, the husband all of a sudden wanted to participate in homework. and do all these activities. And she thought he's trying to be super dad, and he's doing it for other reasons. Maybe he wants to get an equal parenting time and reduce child support. She thought it was nefarious, didn't think he was genuine. And when we talked to the husband, the dad, he just said he never had an opportunity to do it. Mom did it, just took over, kind of helicoptered during the course of the relationship. He never had an opportunity to sit down and do the projects and in the homework with the children. And so after they separated, he actually had this opportunity to participate in schooling while the kids were in his care. So it was coming from a place, from his heart, compassion, completely in the child's best interest. But this is the kind of change you're going to see in spouses and parents after you separated. People who didn't have a chance to step up during the course of the relationship for whatever reason now have an opportunity to do so. So be flexible. If at all possible, if there is a dispute, talk about it privately with the other parent and try to provide a united front to the child in terms of whatever the issue happens to be, of the flavor of the day, little Johnny's got, whatever the case is. Provide that unified front. Kids these days are so smart, so intuitive, and pick up on so many signals that, if they think they can divide and conquer, play the parents off against each other, that may be the route they choose to take. I'm not saying all kids are like that, but you're providing a unified front on your parenting approach and communicating with the child, I think you're going to be in a much better place.
Absolutely. I know we sort of touched mostly on parents. Before we kind of wrap up, one conversation or one topic, sorry, that can come up is, what about extended family? What about grandparents? Do they have any say? Do they have any leverage or pull when it comes to parenting decisions or co-parenting? Shanza, before we sort of wrap up, do you mind sharing a little bit about, do grandparents have a say? Do they have, are there any guidelines that they can follow?
Yeah, and Russ even mentioned this, even you did stuff earlier today about how how a great resource they are, especially in emergencies and when you're dealing with children and parenting and schooling, things can come out of nowhere. Like a kid's sick, he's in school, both parents are at work. Who are you going to turn to, right? Extended family is there, and they're a great resource. And you notice, I'm pretty sure we've all noticed this as lawyers, sometimes due to strong feelings that parents hold about their former partner, they feel the need to even cut off the in-laws from the children and the children's lives. And don't do that unless there are valid reasons. It's usually best to avoid doing that. Grandparents can provide love, and they can provide a strong family bond, which is so important for kids who are going through separation and divorce. They see their parents separating, and they're losing their immediate family and the unified household. And if you also cut them off from the extended family and the grandparents, they're going to miss out on connections with people they consider family, which can bring significant changes to their lives. And so there are so many benefits to maintaining that contact with extended family. Especially when it comes to children's self-esteem. Divorce can impact their self-esteem so much, making them question who they are, who their family is, and if they're still loved. Sometimes kids can even blame themselves. We don't know what's going on through their heads. So having that support system, having the grandparents and extended family be there for them, especially if parents are going through a hard time with the divorce, can really provide them that stability. If there were traditions while you were together where the kids were seeing the grandparents on certain weekends, for example, continue doing them. Don't, just because you're separating, don't change everything for the children. if these extended family members were important to the children before the separation, they will continue to be just as important afterward. So keep those traditions going, keep them involved with the family. This also brings a sense of belonging to them. The children might need to feel that they still belong to both families, regardless of the reason for the separation, even if one parent is no longer in the picture. So have your extended family be there, let them support you and your children.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
advice. It takes a village. It really does.
I can add to that.
Mhm.
Justice Ingram made a decision for grandparent access on a grandparent application to the court and granting the grandparent access. Let me just preface this, but grandparents are sometimes the only stable force in a child's life when the parents are going to war. So I think they're great and provide that stability. Long story short, that decision got appealed to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal reversed it and said, no, parents decide what the grandparents' parenting time would be. Now, recent changes in our legislation, we say that it says and other people's, and so it's grandparents, their door opened up again, and now they can have these contact orders. So it's kind of an interesting evolution. But I go back to the quick story time here. My dog Lucy's enjoying this story. I represented Dad. Mom was estranged with her father, so the grandfather. They had a dispute unrelated to anything about the child or the family. And so she cut his access off just to be spiteful, right? This is the way she's going to get back at him. So Dad, my client, comes in and Mom and Dad are fighting it out. Said, well, her dad's contacting me and wants to have access with the kid, which I do. I guess your parenting time, and sure, I think grandparents are great. And so that particular grandparent had his time and access through not his daughter, but his daughter's ex, right? But what that did, not only did it help foster that relationship, it showed that my client was the more balanced parent. He recognized that having a relationship with this extended family, even though it's not in his side, was in the child's best interest. And he put the child's best interest ahead of his own by sacrificing some of the parenting time with him so she can have that relationship with her grandfather. So that's my advice in terms of thinking about these relationships. They're hugely important, hugely valuable to the child's development and upbringing. And they're also good when it comes to back to school because they can pick up and drop off if you have to work and you can't be there for the bus.
Right. Yeah, I can't even remember how many times, my mom got stuck at work, my grandma lives around the corner, really lean on those support systems. And I think, all of us touched on this theme, even though it's back to school, whether we're talking back to school, we're talking decision making, we're talking summer, it really boils down to what's in the best interest of the children, trying to maintain, effective, amicable communication styles, and to plan for as much as possible so that you're always on the same page, and to have protocols in place on how to deal with disputes later down the line.
Mhm.
So we are 6:05, 6:06. It's after hours. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We're very happy to be back. For all of our Zoom attendees, following the webinar, a brief survey will appear, allowing you to share your comments, your suggestions for future topics, other things that, you like to see more of from us. Your feedback is always greatly appreciated. And I did mention at the start this opportunity to have a complimentary 20-minute meeting with one of our lawyers. So in order to take advantage of that, please provide the code back to school. When scheduling an appointment, you can call our office. Russ did mention we have operators standing by, so feel free to give our office a call to book that. You can also email Nicole at our intake department. That's Nicole@russellalexander.com. Just make sure to provide that code back to school and to register before noon this Friday. Your appointment doesn't have to be before noon this Friday, but just register before noon this Friday. And we also have registration open for our next event, our next after hours next week, where we're going to be talking about domestic violence and legal protections. So in order to register for that, go to russellalexander.com/familylawnow. And you can also see all of the upcoming topics that are on the schedule as well. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you to all our panelists. It's super fun to be back, not back to school, but back to after hours.
Yeah, Shanza, Joseph, fantastic job tonight. Steph, great job hosting. Thank you so much. And I hope our audience has a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.